Okay, so today I'm going to go ahead and go over on how to properly deploy a Dell Poweredge server. These methods work for many other servers too. This is generally just the way I do things and what I've learned over the years of dropping them on my feet and having them start on fire and all that other stuff. I probably prepared around 500 servers, if give or take some, in both time-sensitive manner and for deployment into a server rack. So this is just some tricks and stuff that I've learned over the years to make the process easier and more streamlined. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be testing the hard drives, and the reason I do the hard drives first and separate from everything else is because the hard drives are more or less one of the parts that's more difficult to test while you're preparing the server. You usually have to run an application like HDSentinel or SmartCTL on Linux to actually get the health status of the drives. So what I recommend doing is use the Linux version of HDSentinel is what I would recommend. It's a lot easier, and they base it on a percentage that makes it easy for you to understand, and they'll tell you if there's a corrupt sector, which is nice. Sometimes the percentage drops because of ECC errors or memory errors. Those aren't that bad, and you can run a drive still with a few percentage points off the health if it's based on those type errors for the drive. But if you start seeing a lot of bad sectors, you might as well just trash the drive. So as you can see here, I'm running a customized piece of software, and if you look right here, it shows that this 146 gigabyte SAS drive has 100% health rating. So don't be scared to use used hardware on a server. In fact, I recommend using used hardware unless generally you're talking about SSDs and they have a lot of wear on them. But it's completely okay to use used hardware as long as you test it thoroughly and it passed the test, you're good. You can use used hardware no problem. You won't see any difference between used hardware and new hardware. Okay, so we're going to move on to the second step of the slide and go ahead and insert these drives really quick. So let me go ahead and get these drives inserted. Okay, so now that that's done, we're going to go ahead and move on to the insertion of the memory. Now, when you're inserting the memory, you're going to want to make sure that you insert all the sticks. So it's not good if you do too much mixing and matching, but it's okay if you do a little bit. So something you need to watch out for when you're inserting the RAM and you're eliminating the bad sticks is if you do too much mixing and matching, what's going to happen is it's going to delay the post or it's not going to post at all. And the reason for that is because the memory controller sometimes starts having issues, especially on older BIOS revision. When you start mixing and matching a lot of sticks, it has to down clock and increase the latency of all the sticks down to the slowest stick. And sometimes when you're mixing and matching a lot, it can cause a lot of issues. But it's okay to match, a few, just you got to be smart about it. But that's okay if you do a little bit. So put in each stick and then go ahead and give it a slight wiggle in the DIMM slot. Don't worry, you're not going to hurt the DIMM slot if you wiggle it back and forth. That's just to ensure the gold connections make contact with each other by scraping each other. Okay, and now that's done, we're going to go ahead and double check the CPUs if you already got a server with CPUs in them or if you're installing them. So right now I'm just pulling the CPU, checking it, checking the thermal paste, make sure it's not too worn, and I'm going to be placing it back in while doing a pin inspection on the motherboard. So right here, after you get the CPU removed, you're going to want to go ahead and inspect the socket, make sure that there's no bent pins. After that, you're going to want to clean the CPU after you removed it, of course, and you probably did a lot better job than I did. Just make sure it's clean, has new thermal paste on it if need be, and put it back into the socket. And you're going to do the same thing, just wiggle it around while it's in the socket, and you're just doing that to make sure that the pins make proper contact with the chip. That way, if you have any grease deposits or anything on the bottom of the contacts, you'll most likely get past that by just giving a little wiggle where those gold contacts will scrape together. So now you should be done with the CPU installation, the memory installation, and you should have made sure everything's posted by now. Uh, so now we're going to move on to the factory resetting and the firmware update process. So for the factory resetting, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make sure the system is posted, of course. For this specific server, you're going to press F2 to get into the system setup menu. After you're into the BIOS, you're going to go ahead, go down to default and default it out. After that's been defaulted out, you're going to go back. Then you're going to go choose iDRAC. Once you're in iDRAC, you're going to want to go ahead and make sure you factory reset the iDRAC controller. Now, most of the Dell servers, you can go ahead and go back while the iDRAC controller settings. Sometimes in older firmware, it can be a little buggy and it won't update the percentage, but most of the time it will. In this case, it didn't for me, but it is still resetting and that process is still going. And the nice part about it is, like I said, on most of the Dell servers, you can do other stuff while it's resetting because the iDRAC is working independent of the rest of the system. So yeah, now you're going to want to go ahead and go back out of that iDRAC menu and get back to the previous page where you saw the option to actually choose iDRAC to go ahead and factory reset it. You'll notice on that same menu there's going to be another selection called device settings. You're going to want to go in there. Once you go in that menu, you're going to see another post screen. On that screen, you're going to see your RAID controller. Hopefully, if everything is working with it and it is going good, you're going to see your RAID controller right there. It might be like an H310 or an H710 mini or an H710P mini. So you're just going to go ahead and select that. Then you're going to go ahead and click on controller management. And then you're going to want to select change controller properties. Then go down and select set factory defaults. And what this is going to do is this is going to set the factory defaults of the PERC controller or the RAID controller, similar on other servers, pretty much the same deal. After you do that, it clears and resets the RAID controller, but it does not clear the stored RAID configuration on the drives. So let's go ahead and confirm that now. And then back out of that menu. Now to clear the RAID configuration, so you're going to go down to clear configuration. Then you're going to confirm the clear. And then you're going to go back and you're going to do the same thing with manage foreign configuration. Foreign configuration means RAIDed drives that came from other servers. Sometimes, most of the time, it will pick up those foreign configurations there. So you're going to make sure you clear that out too. On mine, as you can see, it's grayed out. That's because there is no foreign configuration for these drives, but you're going to make sure you do both those steps when you do this. Okay, so now that we finished the PERC reset, the BIOS reset, and we cleared the configurations on the drives and we reset the iDRAC, now we're going to move on to the firmware update process, which luckily for this server is really easy. It's just one ISO. You use Rufus or another utility and just throw it onto a USB, and you boot to it, you confirm it, and you wait, and everything's done. So first, I'm going to show you where to get that download at. So first, just go to Google and type in R620 Poweredge support Dell. Those are the keywords you need to bring it up for Google. Then you're going to see support for Poweredge R620 drivers and downloads. Click this one. So once you show up on the default Poweredge R620 Dell support page, to get the ISO to pop up, you're going to type platform. And you can even search platform right here, and you're going to see platform specific bootable ISO PER620, and you're going to see the date is 07 July 2021. Now you're going to want to go ahead and get this download. As you can see, this might be something new because I haven't been used to updating like this before. This is something new I've done myself. And what's really nice about this ISO too is that you can put this thing onto a PXE server and you can do like 10, 20, 30 servers at a time if you want to. That way you can update them in bulk. But we're just going to be downloading this, and then after we download, I'm going to use Rufus or something or some other Windows utility, put the ISO there and boot boot to that USB. That way y'all can see the process. It's really easy. I really like this. I don't know if this is new. Maybe one of y'all know, but to me it looks new. I haven't seen this before. Um, so I mean, I know for a lot of different servers they have ISOs and that do all the firmware updates at once, but for the Dell R620, I haven't seen this before. This seems to be new to me. So we'll go ahead and save it. Let's go ahead and use Rufus to go ahead and make a bootable USB of that ISO we downloaded. So right click, I'm going to run Rufus, make sure that USB is inserted in the system, and I'm going to navigate to that ISO we just downloaded. Okay, so let's go ahead and find that ISO. Okay, let's go ahead and shoot that over to the USB. Okay, so after that USB is done being made, gonna go ahead and put it in the server and boot it. And you're gonna get to the boot menu. Usually on the Dells and a few other ones, it's F11. A lot of times you get to there by going to the system setup and then backing out and looking for the boot option again. But y'all know how to do that part. So anyway, just boot to the USB, and it will ask you, I think, one question for confirmation, and then you go ahead and you let it finish updating the firmware. Now the process does take for a while. On mine, I saw the screen go off once or twice, and it took, I think, about like 30 minutes or something like that, because it does all the firmwares. I think it even does maybe the SAS backplane. It's a complete package for those servers in general. And like I said, I think this is something new they're doing, because I don't remember seeing these before. I usually had to hand update them one by one with the USB, or by actually loading up an OS or putting one of the hard drives I already had an OS on and clicking the update packages. So, one important thing to note too is that when the firmware update process finishes, you're gonna want to you're gonna push enter to reboot, and then you're gonna let it reboot, because when it reboots again, that's when it does the BIOS update. It does the other updates, but then it does the BIOS update on reboot. And when I first saw that, a lot of times I was thinking like, oh hey, it's not working. No, it's working. You just gotta let it reboot. It does that if you do any of the firmware update options besides the UEFI, which uses the EFI file to do the BIOS update. Then you don't have that reboot. At least I don't think so anyway. Okay, so when this finishes, we're going to go ahead and move on to the RAID controller configuration once again. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to go back in there, and now that we've updated all the firmware, we're going to go ahead and create our RAID array, and then we're going to set boot. So let's go ahead and get started here. The first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to hit F2 to get in your system setup menu. And then you're going to want to go ahead and scroll down to device settings and press enter. After you do that, you should see this page. Go ahead and press enter on your RAID controller. Then go to virtual disk management and press enter. And press enter again on create virtual disk. So after that, you should be on the create virtual disk page. Now with Dell, their configuration wizard is a little confusing to most, unfortunately, at least for the R620 and ones of this generation. And the reason I say that is because if you're doing a RAID 10, you need to have 2 spans. So if you're using 8 disks, you need to have 4 disks on span 1 and 4 disks on span 2. Now, usually that's very common sense oriented, so it's usually done by default on most RAID controllers you see out there. You don't even have to assign them specific spans. It's just they're automatically divided up evenly. So I'm kind of confused on why those options are there, but they're there. So, I mean, I've been back so many years ago, I've gotten stuck on this a few times. I was like, oh, it's one of these controllers. So, uh, just go ahead and go down to after you select your RAID level. If you're doing a RAID 10, you go to select physical disk, select half of your disk. If you're doing all of them and you have 8 or whatever number, you'd select half of them for span 1, and then apply, okay, and then half of them for span 2, and the same thing. So let's go ahead and do that. Go ahead and click on select physical disk for span 1, and go ahead and add half your disk. This is if you're doing a RAID 10. So you had half your disk here, so check, 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 and check. Make sure you got all those. And then go ahead and apply changes. Go back and do the same thing for span 2. After you're done with that, and you're back to the create virtual disk page, you can go ahead and name it and go ahead and press enter on create virtual disk. Now you're going to go ahead and go back a page if you're not already there and click on controller management. After you click on controller management, click change controller properties. And what we're doing now is we're setting the boot. So this way the server knows what drive to boot to, and you're just saying you're setting that RAID that you just created as boot. And then you're going to also want to make sure you set the boot in the BIOS after that, which you can choose, if you want the USB to boot or the RAID array controller to boot. So you're going to choose your RAID array controller, and then when it goes to the RAID array controller, the RAID array controller is going to know to boot to this RAID array that you just created, which is what you're doing here. So we just set boot, and we're done. Well, guys, I don't think I'm going to have to explain on how to go ahead and get back to the BIOS and set the primary boot device to your RAID controller. I think y'all know how to do that. Y'all probably already know how to do a lot of stuff on here. But I'm sure you found a lot of helpful tips that would help y'all when y'all are deploying servers. And if it's helped you, please subscribe to the channel, or maybe send a donation, or subscribe to my Patreon or something like that so y'all can help me out as well. All right.